Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar. My name is Tatiana Massuno. I'm a professor at the Federal Rural University of Rio de Janeiro, UFRJ, and I'm delighted to be here today, especially because we'll be talking to two dear colleagues of mine, and we'll be talking about a topic which is very, very important, which is the topic of the Anthropocene. This is the first webinar of a series of webinars called the Anthropocene and the Humanities. And the idea of this series is just to discuss how this concept, the Anthropocene, challenges or begs for a revision of certain concepts in the humanities. So, simply put, the Anthropocene was a term coined in the natural sciences, and it's a term that names a new geological time, which is basically a time when humans as a species are perceived to have gained geological force. So this concept, the Anthropocene, challenges certain views on our modern concepts and begs for the reorientation of disciplines. And that's why we are here. Today we are going to be talking to two scholars that have their researches on literature, language, and culture. We are going to be talking to a scholar from Indonesia and a scholar from Brazil. Yeah. And just to get started, I'm gonna talk to my dear colleague Mundi Rayahu. So without further ado, let's get started. I'll introduce Professor Mundi. So Professor Mundi has a BA in English Literature, an MA in American Studies, and she has a PhD degree in Cultural and Media Studies. She currently teaches at the English Literature Department at UIN Malang, Indonesia, and her research lies in disciplines such as English Literature, Cultural Studies, Discourse in Media, and academic writing. So, Mundi, thank you so much for being here. It's a great pleasure to see you again, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Tatiana, for giving me the time and opportunity to have discussion here. And I would like to discuss about this topic, the eco-criticism and the literary resistance in the age of meaning, and the case of gold mining resistance in Trenggalek. Trenggalek is a regency in East Java, Indonesia. So, what I'm going to discuss about this issue, this topic is I'm going to talk about the mining in contemporary literature and gold mining in Trenggalek, and then the resistance of the gold mining and the eco-criticism perspective on the mining. Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank that Tatiana give me this topic about Anthropocene, and I'm directly agreed to present this topic because I had research on this issue of the eco-criticism and the resistance against the gold mining in Trenggalek. Trenggalek is the neighborhood in a, yeah, it's about 40 kilometers from where I am now. And it was a very hot issue there. So I'm going to discuss about this. We know that eco-criticism is literary and cultural theory, and it focuses on the relationship between literature and the physical environment, particularly in the context of environmental issues and the challenges. And here is what I am going to talk about the mining in contemporary literature. So There have been many literary works discussing the concern about our environmental issues, and it's not only here in Indonesia, but I think in many places in the world. So, mining issues often serve as a powerful lens to explore broader themes of environmental degradation, economic exploitation, and social injustice. The portrayals range from historical account of the early industrial age to contemporary narratives that reflect the ongoing environmental concerns. So, for example, in Emile Zola's Germinal in 1894, talking about the mining industry, which is depicted with stark realism. So it illustrates the condition in which the miners in 19th century France, the poverty, the hazardous work conditions, and the social unrest, all of them have been the concern, I think, since the activities of the mining becomes more and more serious concern. In American context, for example, we also have a novel by Upton Sinclair in 1917. It's talking about the brutal realities of the coal mining industry in the early 20th century. So, this novel, this literary work, is not only function as the literary work per se, but it has been an investigative journalism as well. And the novel exposed the exploitation, dangerous working conditions faced by miners in the United States. So the depiction of the corrupt mine owners, unsafe labor practices, and the lack of regulatory oversight, the echoes of Zola's themes and criminal. So this King Cole highlighting the universal struggles of miners across different eras and geographies. So it has functions, important functions for the environmentalists. It's called for social reform. So it's not only reflecting the social condition, but in a broader sense, it has become the critic of the capitalism, the industry, mining industry, and the exploitation of both human and the nature. So we come to the next is I'm going to talk about the literary resistance in gold mining in Trenggalek. So here is the map of the Trenggalek Regency. Trenggalek Regency is the geographically it is near the ocean, and it's also mountainous areas. Most of the people in these regencies are peasants, farmers, and they have a big concern with their environment because the environment will directly impact on their way of living. So there is a big issue of gold mining since 2016 because there was a government decree that give the concession to the Sumber Mineral Nusantara. It is a PT. It is a company of mining company who got the concession of the 9 district in that areas. And since then, the people work hard to resist against the mining, the gold mining. So my data is the data that I've taken from this issue is from I drew the data from the local. I mean local Galexeo. Galexeo is a local website that is non-profit and it is independent, and those who write down the issues here are the young people who living there, and they have a big concern with their environment and their life. And this is I think this is the only one medias, citizen medias that talking about the concern of this mining. So I take 6 articles, 6 essays from this Galexeo, and it was published in 2021, 2022, and the writer is written here. And those articles, for example, the first article is talking about the story of resistance against gold mining from people of Suro village, Trenggalek. The second article is people of Trenggalek are able to live by agriculture, not gold mining. And number 3, the title of the article is Surveying the Water Springs in Ngadimulyo village. And number 4, the agriculture at the karst land are using geo-historical method. So there are many karst areas in that regency, and the agriculture that is making the use of the karst in the karst area using a specific method. And the gold mining that is run by this company has become the has become the threat for the people's agriculture, the land sustainability, etc. And the other number 5, the title of the article is We Do Not Need Gold Mining. Kampa only needs conservation. So the people having a very great concern. They have ideas and they have enough knowledge to understand their own environment, their own areas and the lands, and they know about the conservation. So these articles are showing their resistance ideas of the school minings. So when we discuss in detail about those articles, we will find out at least there are some reasons for the resistance. The economic factors and the natural resources sustainability and the security factors. Each of the factors is related each other, but for instance, the economic factor is affected by the declining of the income of the farmers because of the long drought, lack of the water for their agriculture activities, and the pollution. So the use of the chemical in the gold mining also give the impact, a very adversary impact, the very bad impact for the agricultural process for the farmers there. And they also realize that most of the people realize that the preservation of the natural resources become a critical issue in building the narration against the gold mining. The mining industry is believed to be the dominant factor that destroy the natural resources. So in this case, what I am discussing is not the literary work like novel or the other literary book. I use the data of the written materials that people write down in that Galaxy.co website. So this is the real concern and the real literature for people to struggle against this gold mining industries. And their concern and their resistance and their struggle is still on going process right now. They work hard to get the what is it to get the governments to cancel the concession or anything like that. But it is, of course, a long way process to get the success for this resistance, and it is still ongoing process. And people in this area in Trenggalek Regency is they have a big concern with their land, their conservation of the forest and the other part of that land, because mostly in the dry season they have a problem with the supply of the water, the clean water for their daily life. And in the rainy season, there are usually a big flood, and there are many unstable soil in that areas. So the landsliding often happens in there. So the mining, the gold mining, has been a big threat for them because of their unstable topography, the landsliding, the flood in the rainy season, and the drought in the dry season. So those are the reasons for the resistance of the people of Trenggalek. And I think this kind of resistance not only happen in this part of Regency in Trenggalek. In many other places in Indonesia, there have been many kind of mining, extracting industry, but the voice of resistance is not as strong as this one, because it is in Java Island, the most populous island in Indonesia, and the people in these areas in Trenggalek are they well educated, and they knowledgeable with their environment and with their resources, the natural resources. That's why the voice of resistance is still going on until now. And you can find also their activities, their resistance, and their ideas for responding this kind of gold mining industries, the natural exploitation from the local voice, from the local website, written by the young people in that areas. So I think there are still many aspects that we can discuss later on, but I will stop my presentation right now and give the time back to Tatiana. Thank you very much, Tatiana.
Thank you so much, Mundi. Yeah, we have, I have here lots of questions about your presentation, but I leave the questions until the end. So now we are going to have Professor Anderson Gomes, yeah, as the speaker. And just before I give Anderson the floor, I'm going to introduce him. So Anderson is a professor of literatures and English at the Federal Rural University of Rio de Janeiro. So he's my colleague. His main areas of studies are American science fiction, multiculturalism, and contemporary Canadian fiction. In 2012, he was awarded with a grant by the International Council for Canadian Studies to conduct a research at the University of British Columbia. In 2016, he participated in the Summer U.S. Institute, sponsored by the U.S. State Department to study contemporary American literature. And in the period of September 2019 and September 2020, he was a visiting research scholar at the University of the Seattle University, okay, Seattle U. So, Anderson, thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tatiana. I'm very glad to be here. I'm very thankful for your invitation, and I'm also very pleased to hear other people discussing this issue, the Anthropocene and its relation to literature. I think Professor Mundi's talk was very enlightening and very thought-provoking. I also have some questions for her. I mean, if we have the time. Anyway, my talk is called The Political and Personal Dimensions of the Anthropocene in Hanya Yanagihara's To Paradise. First, I have to say that I have been conducting this research. So, the relation between the Anthropocene and literature for about 2 years. But I have to say that more recently, the theme of the pandemic or pandemics in general is the theme that has been interesting me the most. So this interplay between the pandemic, climate, the climate crisis, and literature, and how all these aspects sort of intermingle. And when I read this novel To Paradise last year, so it sort of blew my mind and it made everything come together. So that's why I chose to talk about this novel today. Well, so the novel To Paradise was published last year, and it is a novel that is composed of three novellas. So it's a very long book. It's a 800-page book, and there are three parts in this book. So there is the first story, so called Book One, named Washington Square. Book Two, Lipowana, and Book Three, Zone 8. The interesting thing about this novel, as I said, that is composed of three stories, is that each story is told with a particular time frame in mind. So the first book is set in 1893. The second one is set in 1993. And the third one is set in 2093. So even though the narratives are told across time and they are sort of independent narratives, even though there are some connections, the setting is more or less the same, which is New York, more specifically Washington Square, and a large estate, a large house in Washington Square. And each novel or each novella, let's call it this way, has a kind of a reference or a style. So the first book, called Washington Square, is very much influenced by the style of Henry James. So it's almost like a parody of a Henry James novel. Book Two is set in 1993, and it follows the tropes of an AIDS novel or an AIDS narrative because it deals particularly with the epidemics of AIDS in New York. And the third one, it is a dystopia. Um, the connection between these books is not only placed on the setting, as I mentioned, New York, Washington Square, but also the names of the characters. So all stories have characters named Charles, David, Edward, but then these characters, even though they have the same names in the three novellas, they apparently have no connection to one another, right? So I intend to investigate later on the three books and how their characters interplay. But for today, I want to focus more specifically on book three, which is called Zone 8. So the story of Zone 8 is that we have New York, more specifically than the Isle of Manhattan, in the year 2093. And in this period, the US is controlled by a fascist totalitarian state. So, one key characteristic of the novel is that, as you can see here on the map on the right, so the Isle of Manhattan has been divided into zones. So you don't have the names of the neighborhoods or the boroughs anymore. So the story, the central part of the story, is going to be focused on Zone 8, which today is more or less the village in New York. So then this area, Zone 8, is where most of the story is going to take place. And the way that this book three, this novella called Zone 8, is organized is that the story is told in 10 parts. And in these 10 parts, you're going to have two narrators. So one narrator is a narrator called Charlie in the year 2093. And the other narrator is the narrator called Charles that starts narrating the year 2043. So these stories are intercalated. And the stories told by this narrator, Charles, starting 2043, they are told as an epistolary novel, so in the form of letters or emails. So the point is that we get the story set in 2093, narrated by Charlie, and the story narrated by Charles in 2043. And then this story narrated by Charles keeps on progressing in time until it reaches 2093. So we have the progression of time in this novella. So as I said, it is a dystopia, and as a dystopia, it has those classic features of a dystopia. So first is the presence of a totalitarian state. I think is already a great indication that this is a dystopia following the classics of 1984 and The Handmaid's Tale. And Zone 8 has a kind of a didactic and moralistic tone. And then I say this not necessarily in a critical way, but more in an analytical way. We know that dystopias very often they have a characteristic that is to present how that world came to be. So normally we enter a dystopia in media res, so in the middle of the story, but always we have, I mean, or very often we have in a dystopia, the moment in which we find out how did things became this way. So how did, for example, the United States become this fascist totalitarian state? And the point here that the novel indicates is that the fascism or the totalitarianism that became implemented in the United States is a consequence of the climate crisis and of pandemics. So what we have in an interesting way is the application of a key technique of dystopias that is euchronia, which is we have the same place, but the narration of the events of that place in different times. And in the case of Zone 8, we're going to have, as I said, the Isle of Manhattan, and more specifically, the Zone 8, in two specific times. So 2043, and from that onwards, and 2093. So when I read this novel, I felt that here we have, I mean, the novel presents a very fruitful discussion, not only of a climate dystopia, but also a pandemics dystopia, because in this world, what we have in the world of Zone 8 is a series of events caused by the climate crisis. For example, everybody has to wear a kind of a refrigeration suit not to get burned when it gets outside. Several birds and animals have become extinct. In New York, there are no more leaves on the trees because leaves don't grow due to the extreme heat, and several others. And in relation to the pandemics dystopia, so after the year 2020, and the novel addresses the 2020 pandemic, real pandemic, very quickly. So it's as if every 5 years there is a new pandemic in the United States and across the world. And due to that, the government has to become more and more authoritarian. So the internet is forbidden so that people don't spread this, I mean, with the justification that people shouldn't spread misinformation in relation to the pandemic. And then people are forbidden of reading certain kinds of books. And then marriages have to become arranged since millions of people died due to the pandemic. And then they need more people to be born to serve as workforce. So then the whole government is organized or reorganized due to the climate crisis and the pandemics. And that made me think a lot of great Amitav Ghosh quotation from the book The Great Derangement, when he says that in the Anthropocene, forces of unthinkable magnitude that create unbearable intimate connections over vast gaps in time and space, they are born. So normally in traditional fiction, or let's say literary fiction, these forces are put aside. But then in the fiction that deals with the climate crisis and the Anthropocene, these forces, they come to the fore. And I like very much this idea of the intimate connections over vast gaps in time and space. And that made me think of how this novel can be read via a historical perspective, a political perspective, and a personal perspective. So let's start with this historical perspective. The novel made me think a lot of the great definition given by Frederick Jameson of the archaeologies of the future. So the idea that in science fiction, and I can say more specifically in the climate crisis, our present is transformed into the past of something to come. So especially now in the discourse of the climate crisis, so a lot is being talked about the future. But then the idea is that that future will only come to be or come to pass, will only happen if we don't act now. And the idea that is presented in Zone 8 is that that future of 2093 with fascism, that future that is dystopic, would only occur if we don't act in the present. So the central idea of a dystopia, that is, of a cautionary tale. And then to think of the present as the past of a future makes a kind of confusion in our heads, and especially when we are considering the climate crisis. So the last point there in this slide is the point mentioned by Chakrabarty in his very influential essay, The Climate of History, when he says that the climate crisis and in the Anthropocene, past and future are thrown into contradiction and confusion. So how can we determine what is past and what is present and what is future when everything becomes interconnected and we cannot separate it clearly as we have been doing since the Enlightenment? Because as Clive Hamilton says, we are in between a past that we seek to escape, which is the past of the exploration of fossil fuels, the past that is focused on the idea of economic process being continuous and endless. So this is a past that we need to escape if we want to survive. But we are also sort of enmeshed with a future that we want to avoid, which is this dystopic future, the future of a climate apocalypse, let's call it this way. But the interesting point is that this future does not occur to us like that, does not happen quickly. It happens gradually, in an almost torturous way. It is very slow. And this reminds me a lot of Rob Nixon's great concept of slow violence. So the idea that the so-called climate crisis or the climate apocalypse, if you want to call it this way, does not happen in the velocity of the internet or the velocity of the media that nowadays we're so much used to, that everything happens like a spectacle. It happens very slow, and it is this slowness that works as a kind of violence. At the same time that we feel the effects, but we don't feel the effects with the urgency that we need. And what Nixon says is that when we realize what is happening to us, probably it's going to be too late. So maybe a great tool that we have, according to Jennifer Rose White, to understand the urgency of the climate crisis is exactly literature or fiction as a whole. Because as she says, literature can project and manipulate in dramatic ways for maximum impact. So maybe this impact that we do not feel with this slowness of time, we can feel with literature, because literature can manipulate characters, time frames, narrative spaces, and then literature can serve as not only this alert, as I said, like a cautionary tale, but as a tool to understand better what is happening around us. So from this historical dimension, I want to move to the political dimension. And I think Zone 8 presents this political dimension very well. First, because it shows climate change as an existential risk, right? So as something that can exterminate humanity. And it shows how the Anthropocene presents to the world a crisis that is not only global, but intergenerational. So when we read Zone 8, and as I said, there are two narrators, we're going to find out that the narrator of 2093, Charlie, is the granddaughter of the narrator of 2043 called Charles. And both are enmeshed in the climate crisis and the pandemic crisis. But this crisis, the fact that both are dealing with similar circumstances in different periods of time, highlights the intergenerational aspect of those crises. And also, the novel is going to cover the global scope of both those crises. So these solutions cannot be found within the spaces or the confines of a single country, but they have to be discussed globally. So the major question is how to act. Is this a problem that we're going to find a simple solution, as many people think about geoengineering or technology is going to come and save us? Or should we think, like famously Donna Haraway mentioned, should we stay with the trouble? So this is a new condition that we need to live with. So the point here, and I think this the answer to this question, how to act, how to stay with this trouble, the answer is given by Hamilton and Bonnell when they say that we need to move on from the idea of geopolitics. So the idea that we have to understand the nature culture divide as an exploration of resources or the confines of the land and how to manipulate the land and how to use the land and its resources in order to achieve progress. But we need to think of Gaia politics. So we have to understand the so-called intrusion of Gaia, as Isabel Stungare said, and not think of the world as only resources, but to think as partners. So the partnership with the world, or what we used to call nature, is key here. So this move from geopolitics to Gaia politics is essential, and it is something that in Zone 8 is what most characters can't see or can't understand. And this is one of the reasons why the dystopia occurs, right? So if we have to stay with this trouble, and we need to think of this move from geopolitics to Gaia politics, so this is irreversible. So how are we going to govern the irreversible? How are we going to govern something that it's not possible to change anymore? We only have to think in terms of mitigation. And by the way, this is another discussion of the climate crisis. Should we stop climate crisis or mitigate it? So it's a discussion for another time. And then the answer that the novel gives in terms of American government is the rise of fascism. So that's the only way to govern the irreversible is to have a totalitarian state. So I think the novel presents very well the risks that the climate crisis and the pandemics show in relation to politics. And the novel highlights the idea that democracy in the climate crisis is always at risk. So if we move from the political and we go to the personal, we have to consider that the characters in the novel are going to be deeply affected not only by the pandemics and the climate crisis, but also this political context. And this made me think of the Enlightenment, and especially Edmund Burke, when he said that humanity or society or culture is an intergenerational partnership. So we only have a government, we only have books, we only have culture, we only have buildings when we are born, because the previous generation left all those things to us. And the next generation will have these things because this present generation will leave things for them. So the way that humanity persists is by passing this intergenerational baton, this intergenerational culture, this intergenerational infrastructure. But the climate crisis, I think, problematizes that because, as Bonilla and Fresso is going to say, that's now what we have is an intergenerational destruction. Because the question that several young people, especially, ask today, we only need to look at the many speeches of Greta Thunberg, for instance, is why didn't people act before? Because then young people today might not have a future in the sense that the exploration of fossil fuel and the deforestation and extinction and so on is still rampant. And this is going to jeopardize, this is going to damage the future of young people today. So it's interesting that the novel Zone 8 also brings that into the fore. Because as I said, since the novel works in two timelines, the one of 2043 and the one of 2093, several of the things that are happening in 2093 are a direct consequence of the inaction or the stupid actions or the wrong actions that were being done in 2043. And the interesting thing is that the decisions, these wrong, stupid decisions of 2043, were being done by the grandfather of the main character in 2093. So she's suffering the consequences not only of someone that came before, but a person with whom she has blood relations, her grandfather. Another interesting question that Zone 8 poses in relation to the Anthropocene is that key question, I think, that we have to understand the Anthropocene. So the age of the Anthropos, that is, whose Anthropos? So whose humankind are we talking about? Because when we say that humans are acting as a geological force, it's not, of course, every human. We're talking about a very specific type of human. And here we can go to several writers that are going to have different opinions. But to a certain extent, all of them agree that this human responsible for the Anthropocene is basically the male, white, Anglo-Saxon human. So that's why some people prefer the term Anglocene instead of Anthropocene, or the Capitalocene, or Oliganthropocene, and so on. And I think that Zone 8 presents this idea of the Anthropocene not as a general humankind, but a very specific humankind, because the novel is going to show that the people that were not necessarily responsible for the Anthropocene are the ones that are going to suffer more strongly the consequences of the Anthropocene. And who are these people? Mostly people of color, queer people, and people with intellectual disability. And how does the novel deal with that? First, by showing that most of the people that are going to react against this totalitarian fascist American state are people of color, are mostly indigenous people, or African American people, because these are the people that are going to become even more marginalized, that are going to live an even more precarious life under this new government. And they are the ones that are going to create rebel groups. And exactly because of that, they're going to be even more oppressed and they're going to be killed. Another central point of the aspect is the point of queer people. So, as I said, as millions of people die in the United States, they want to have campaigns for having more children. So they want couples to reproduce more and more. And in the case of queer people, they're going to suffer a lot of discrimination, because then, since same-sex couple are not able to reproduce, at least in the conventional sense or in the biological sense in the novel, then they're going to become marginalized, and then homosexuality is going to become a crime. So then queer people also are going to suffer the consequence of this totalitarian state that is a consequence of the climate crisis. And perhaps the more direct effect here, thinking about marginalized groups, is people with intellectual disability. Because one of the consequences of the most serious pandemic that is going to be mentioned in the novel, that is the pandemic of the year 2017, is that this pandemic is going to affect basically children. And then the sort of medication that these children will need to take is so strong that you're going to develop a kind of mental disability. It's a kind of an autism, but people should become almost without empathy. And then the sort of intellect of these people is going to become limited. And the narrator of the novel, Charlie, is a person with this intellectual disability. And due to that, she's going to suffer a lot. She's going to suffer a lot of oppression and a lot of discrimination. And the point that she is the narrator of the novel, I think, highlights how the novel showcases the way that the personal dimension, so individuals are going to be affected by the climate crisis and the pandemics. So anyway, a lot to discuss. So I'm still in the middle of the investigation of this novel, and I'm sure that it will be able to present even more interesting topics as my investigation runs along. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anderson, for this amazing talk. Yeah, we have some questions here in the chat box. So we are now going to discuss some of the issues that arose from your presentations. I'm going to start off with a question from Professor Adriana, right? So this is a question from Mundi. She asks, Professor Mundi, do you believe the recency of the written production is due to the exploitation by companies, or would there be an influence of political debate concerned with sustainability that got stronger in the last decade? There is a continuation to the question.
Okay, that's an interesting question. Thank you for the questions. Is it the impact of the extracting activities of the gold mining, or is it political debate? Yes, of course, it is the impact of this mining activities, but also the issue, the problem that people face in their daily life built the political debate. So political debate here depends on who are debating, who are involved in that debate. Here in this context, people in the local areas, they perceive that the gold mining industries, that the extracting activities are not environmentally friendly. They realize that these activities, the gold mining activities, including digging, extracting, and using the mercury chemicals, have the adversary impact for the land sustainability, for the uh, their farming activities. It also give impacts, adversary impacts on the water supply because of the pollution of the chemical they use in the extracting activities. So the political debate is the debate that happened in the society, that what people see, what people feel, and what people think. So it is not the political debate of the elite politic, not the political debate of the elite, who is it, activists, but it is the debate at the grassroots level. So I think it becomes the real problem when those people who face this issue, the problem or the impacts of the gold mining, um, in daily life, they got the impact in their real life. So they will speak up and they will get more knowledge. I think they are learning by doing as well on the impacts of the mining industries. Because the mining has been started in 2016, and some of the areas, but not all of the areas yet. There are 9 districts, the concession owned by the company, but it has started from, for example, in a particular village. The people in that village worried many things because of this extracting activities with heavy equipment will also give impact on the natural disaster, the flood, the pollution of the water in their water supply or water springs, and also the landsliding because of this extracting activities. Because of landsliding caused by the activities and the condition of the land, which is the soil, which is not stable. And then there's also the concern about the, it is called, they call it karst, yeah, the karst areas. The karst areas, it's important for the people, especially for the water supply. If the karst areas that belongs to this concession land owned by this company, if they do their extracting activities in this karst area, it will be dangerous because the karst area is the place to make the hydrological aspects stable in that area. So the problem of the water supply, the problem of the water pollution, and the stability of the hydrology of the areas will be threatened by this mining industry. So I think the question of the impact of the mining industries, and it also built the political debate on the sustainability, because the people realize that their economic sustainability, their social sustainability are threatened by this company. They people think that from the data, but from this text, people realize that this company is just benefited for the company, not for the people. So that's why people do not. They said that we do not eat the gold. We eat the rice. We eat from the agriculture products, from the agriculture life. So their livestock, their agriculture are certain by this gold company. And who is the gold for? It is not for them. It is not for the people, because it is not, what is it? It doesn't involve the people, the community, the villagers in doing their business, of course, because it is a big company, which is in the capitalist system, is not benefited for the people at the grassroots level. Well, I think that's my answer or discussion on this issue. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think Anderson had a question as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Professor Mundi, hi. So I really liked your talk, and I was just curious. I liked the connection that you made with Germinal by Zola. And then when we think of Germinal, we think of realism in terms of literary style, let's call it this way.
Yes.
And I was just curious about this fiction that deals specifically with contemporary mining. How would you define it? Would you say that there is still a kind of a realist kind of intention in fiction, or do you think it's something entirely new? So how would you define, like in terms of literary style or aesthetically, this type of fiction that is being produced today about mining?
Yeah, I think that Germinal is very realist because it describes the real situation or the condition of the uh, poor people, the dangerous situation, and the what is it? The impacts of this industry. So the industry has been started long time ago, and it is a kind of universal concern. I think there is always the story of um, the miner, the workers in the mining. There is never a happy story on that mining industries. People are the workers are also become the, what is it, the victims of this capitalist system, because the company, the industry, the extracting industry only benefited on the company themselves, the owner of the company, the capitalist. And that's why the in the company, the worker become the victims with a hazardous working place, with their poor condition, and the people surrounding, or the, what is it, the people in the area of that mining is also become the victims, because they do not get the benefit from, most of the benefit goes to the company owner. That is always happen anywhere. I think that's universal since those ancient times until nowadays. And I think Indonesia has many cases of mining industries, which is um, also causing the social unrest, the social poverty, also the social unrest, like the Freeport in Indonesia, Freeport with the gold mining, uh, one of the biggest gold mining, and the company, the Freeport company, owned by the United States company. So the benefit of those extracting activities goes to the capitalist, the owner of this company. The people surrounding this didn't get anything. So uh, that's, I think, the realism that is depicted in literary works like the Cemino novel. Yeah.
But something that I found quite interesting about both presentations was that both kind of grappled with the aspects of the political dimensions and also the personal dimensions, right? So Mundi presentation basically focused on a very local community which used a website as a medium for resistance. And I was very curious about how this resistance is perceived in Indonesia. Because you talked about a very local community that suffered the consequences of the environmental impact. Is it something
Yeah.
that finds its way into the literature produced in Indonesia? Is it something that finds resonance in the discourses, the contemporary discourses in the Indonesian community, or is it something that remains local?
That's a very interesting questions. Yeah. This is a local website, and last year it got award. Uh, this local website awarded by journalistic. What is it? AJI, Aliansi Journalistic Independent. So it got award from the Independent Journalistic Alliance. It is at national level. It means that this voice, the local voice, is also heard nationwide or worldwide because yeah, thanks to the internet, which is borderless, those the voice from the local or the grassroots level can be heard nationally, and the people's resistance do not stop on that website. Last year or this year, I think this year, the early of this year, some of the people from this regency tried to speak up and articulate their aspiration, their ideas at the national level. So they try to go to the stage demonstration in Jakarta, in the capital city in Jakarta, and try to have convey their aspiration, their ideas to the Ministry of Mineral, the ministry who are dealing with this issue. But it was not successful. Um, Although they have gone to Jakarta, you know that such a mining business a very big business. It is not cannot be solved only in just one kick. But what I think we have to appreciate and we have to support is that their resistance is very organic resistance. It means that it is not from the elite or from the it is from the grassroots. It is from the people themselves, and they are now still trying to stand with their choice to refuse, to reject, to resist the gold mining. And I think it is a very good case because
It is.
before that um, there was never resistance in such a long term in such a long term because usually um, the people are defeated by the company and the bureaucracy who support that the company, something like that.
Thank you so much, Mundi. There,
Okay.
there, there are some questions here for Anderson too. There's a very, very long question here. Okay. So there's a question from Ivan Chernov, and he asks, Professor Anderson, in a marginal but important part of literature on political science and political history, there is a statement that has been repeated from time to time. Western democracy is a Holocene phenomenon. Do you agree that this is the warning that the book is trying to make in a literary way?
This is a great point.
Just continue the question here.
Okay, sure, sorry.
Democracy has been associated with Western-style economic development since the end of the 19th century. Are totalitarian, theocratic states the new normal in the Anthropocene? And then he mentions, a climate denier has just been elected in a country near you, Argentina. Yeah, sadly.
Yeah, no. Before I saw the ending of the question, that's the first thing I thought about the results of the Argentinian elections yesterday. Yeah, you know what? Reading your question, the first thing that occurred to me is another science fiction book called the Three Body Problem, a great Chinese science fiction book. And I mean, it's a very complex book, but one of the points of the book is that the only way for a society to thrive is to have stability. And in this novel, The Three Body Problem, societies always crumble very quickly because in this science fiction world, the sun always keeps changing places, and the rotation of the Earth or of a planet around the sun does not have the same level of stability like we have here in solar system. Oh, great, you know it. So, and that's the reason why the crumbling of those societies occur too briefly. Now, using this metaphor to talk about our current world, then we are also facing another stability, so a stability of another kind, that is the instability, better saying, the instability of the climate crisis. But then the question, and I think this is linked to the question that you asked, is this instability a new form of stability? So are we going to stay with this problem? So are we treating the climate crisis or the Anthropocene as a problem that needs a solution? Or should we try to organize ourselves to deal with it? And this new form of organization has to be thought of, especially in terms of politics. And the interesting thing is that normally when you listen to some very influential global north historians, they mention, well, but the forces that organize the world are the liberal democracy and free market capitalism. So these are the forces that rule the world. So it's either your power to vote or your power to shop. So these are the two forces that the individual has that sort of rule the world. The individual can exert his or her own power politically or economically, either via the vote or via buying, consuming, purchasing. But then the Anthropocene puts these two ways of exerting your power, at least in the global north, puts these two powers at risk. So is really democracy the at least this type of democracy that has existed for so long, is this type of democracy then at risk with the climate crisis? So I would say that it is. But the worst, I think, consequence is that, like I said in my presentation, how to govern how to govern in this new scenario. And I think the greatest risk is that the only question, or the only answer, or at least the first answer that people come up with is totalitarianism. And I think this is what these novels show, that when faced with an existential risk, what the political answer is always in relation to control, this overt control over the population, because this is going to be the ultimate way to prevent a crisis. Maybe it's even a psychoanalytical uh, point. So since you cannot control the climate crisis because you cannot control Gaia, you control the people, right? So this is the sort of answer that most politicians uh, come up with, right? Of course, we have seen that in other types of dystopias, but I think that um, no crisis dealt in those dystopias has come close to the magnitude or the impact of the climate crisis. So the real concern here is that since this is the major crisis perhaps that humanity has ever faced, then the sort of totalitarian fascist state that is going to come as a consequence of this, it's going to be one of the worst and one of the greatest that the world has ever seen, right? Because as I said, we're dealing with a crisis in a global scale. So, what kind of a global reply is going to arise as a consequence of this, right? But yeah, but I think you have a great point. And to think of maybe democracy equals Holocene, so Anthropocene equals what kind of political institution, right? Is it fascism? We need to see. And I don't know, considering what has happened in the United States, in Brazil, and what is about to happen in Argentina, I think literature here is showing to be very acute in noticing these shifts and trends that are occurring politically in the world.
Okay, very nice. I thought it was a very interesting question, especially because it touches upon a very specific issue of the Anthropocene, which is this idea of boundless freedoms, you see. So, in a way, in the Anthropocene, we find ourselves limited by a reactive planet in a way, which circumscribes our freedoms, right? But we have new questions here. Questions from Adriana, okay, to Anderson. And the question is, Professor Anderson, I got curious about the debate on neurodivergency. It seems that queer and people of color took the leadership in questioning the system. Would neurodivergent people not take this place as a group or having the narrator as a neurodivergent person also showing this position in a different way? I would like to hear you comment a little bit more on this anthropo debate.
Well, thanks for the question. That's a great question. Yeah, because considering the two aspects that I highlighted in my presentation, the political and the personal, I would say that in this novel, the queer people and the people of color, they're more affected in the political scope, whereas neurodivergent people or people with intellectual disabilities, they are affected not only in the political dimension, but also on the personal dimension. Because as I said, people of color in the novel, they suffer more prejudice as a consequence of this fascist state. Then queer people, not only they're going to suffer more prejudice, but then they're going to be persecuted because of their sexual orientation and mostly because of the fact that they cannot their children. So the only way for them to survive is to get married to a person they don't love, right? So to have a conventional heteronormative marriage. But then when we get to these neurodivergent people, then the consequence is not only in relation to more prejudice, but also they suffer more directly, like in their bodies, in their skin, the consequence of the horrible actions of this totalitarian state. Because as the victims of the pandemic, because I mean, the neurodivergent people that the novel focuses on are the people that are the survivors of the pandemic of 2017. That, as I said, so this pandemic killed millions, affected mostly children. And then the children that were able to survive, they were mostly children of affluent families that were able to pay for the medication, a specific kind of medication mentioned in the novel called Zycor. But then this medication, even though saved the life of the child, would have very strong side effects. And one of the side effects was exactly affecting the intellectual abilities of these people. So, for example, in the case of the narrator, it affects her curiosity. So she becomes a less curious person. Another aspect, and one that the novel focuses a lot on, is social skills. So the narrator has very uh, little ability to work in society in terms of starting a conversation, following a conversation, and so on, right? So then I think the dimension of the effect of this new society on neurodivergent people is stronger because to a certain extent, people of color and queer people, they can join rebel groups. For example, what's in the novel they call insurgents. But then neurodivergent people cannot, exactly because they lack these skills to organize themselves politically, right? So they become somewhat passive. And that's why in the novel, the fact that you have a narrator that is neurodivergent, we have the progression of her behavior. So she starts the novel very passive, but as the novel moves along, and she will start discovering better the way that society works, and she will join an insurgent group in the end, right? This is a kind of a spoiler of the novel, but anyway. So she will. So it's a kind of a process of discovery. So in a way, it is a novel of growth, of maturity, a kind of a Bildungsroman, right? And just to conclude the answer, one great point of the novel too is the fact that these groups, they very often they join forces, and sometimes they join forces because of the limitations that the government presents to them. And the best example of the novel is that the narrator, Charlie, who is neurodivergent, so nobody wants to get married to her. So, as I said, in this society, all marriages are arranged. So, nobody wants to get married to her because of her condition. And also, she is a person of color. So, she gets married to a man who is gay. And the fact that they get married, so it is an arranged marriage, is that in this way they believe that one can protect the other from prejudice and discrimination and the oppression that they feel on the outside world. So even though there is all this weight of oppression over them, they are able to join forces in order to survive. So the novel also, I think it's a beautiful novel about the power of community. I think this is also a great point. Well, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what I thought.
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to ask one final question because I was curious about this novel. I don't know the novel, yeah, but it's quite contemporary in the sense that we have just experienced a pandemic. And I was thinking about this idea that you brought from Amitav Ghosh, that the novels in the Anthropocene, they are supposed to represent the unthinkable, and how the form of the novel has to be altered, or the form of the novel is not suitable to represent the unthinkable anymore. First, so my first question is about the form, right? Because you mentioned in the beginning some novels that deal with the climate reality, the climate catastrophe that we are experiencing. So we can talk about this sci-fi. I don't know if you would categorize the novel into the sci-fi category. And secondly, because we kind of experienced a similar situation. So is it so unthinkable? Can we think about this climate emergence as something in the future? Is it really so slow moving? Yeah, because we are experiencing in our bodies more and more urgently the effects of the Anthropocene. So it's just some questions for you.
No, yeah, this point of the cli-fi. So I think I'm a little ambivalent on this cli-fi nomenclature because I think on the one hand, I think it serves as a very useful shorthand for what we want to talk about. So instead of explaining everything, if we just say cli-fi, the person immediately knows what we're talking about. So I think it's very helpful in this way, in a didactic way.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, I think it sometimes pigeonholes some novels that are very encompassing or very ambitious. And we tend to say, oh no, but it's a novel that only talks about heat waves and floods, and So in the case of To Paradise, I think to call it, I think it's a novel with some cli-fi elements, but I wouldn't say it is a cli-fi novel. First, because as I said, it is a novel divided in three novellas. And the first and the second novella have nothing to do with the Anthropocene and climate change. As I said, the first one is set in the 1890s and the second one in the 1990s. So, and they have other concerns. The third one, so Zone 8, is the one that addresses this topic more directly, right? So we could say that we can read, I think it's our interpretation that sort of informs the text. So in this case, I think we can read Zone 8 as a cli-fi novel, but as I said, it's not only that. I think it's also a pandemic novel or novella, let's call it this way, right? And the second aspect, I totally agree with you, right? So the idea, I like very much the concept of slow violence, because even though we are feeling it in our bodies, like in the case of Rio in the past, we were feeling the heat wave in our bodies, but when we turn on the newspaper, the news channels, it was all about people are going more to the beach, and the ice cream parlor is selling a lot, and wow, the fan is on. Look, so people haven't realized yet what is going on. So if on the one hand, everybody turns on the air conditioning and there are power outages and so on, the discourse, it's not the kind of discourse that highlights the urgency of the matter. And for this to occur, it will also take some time. So even though people are burning up, sometimes literally, the discourse is still a discourse of fun and entertainment and let's go to the beach and things like that, right? So for I think more and more people are coming to realize, I mean, people in general and also the media and so on, the urgency of the climate crisis, but I think it's not nearly close to the level of response that we need from the media, from politicians, and from the public in general, I would say.
Okay, thank you
That
so
answers.
much.
May I have question for
Of
Anderson?
course, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting novel discussing about climate crisis. And also, I have a question. Does it mean that from that novel, the political system or the governmental system doesn't work at all at the end of the day? So the title of To Paradise, it seems that in religion, it is in religious term, it is called finding Messiah, finding the Savior. Is it the same thing? Is a and if it is so, it seems that it's a very pessimistic, or it seems no future for the humans' social systems in in a wider sense. What do you think?
I loved your questions. Yeah, because I've been, as I said, I'm in the middle of my research in relation to this novel, and I've been thinking about them a lot. So, in relation to your first question, whether this system works or not, I think it's the big question of dystopias, right? Because in a dystopia, then for the government and for some part of the population, the system does work, right? So that's why that dystopia was implemented. It's that classic saying that one person's utopia is another person's dystopia, right? So in the case of the novel, I think this is presented very, very well in the sense that, as I said, the narrator of 2043 is the grandfather of the neurodivergent narrator of 2093. And then this narrator of 2043 is a scientist. So he starts as a scholar, as a scientist, but as the government becomes more totalitarian, he starts going up the ranks. And then everything that he does is to a certain extent with a good intention. So the pandemics start to mount. So then he's the one that agrees with the prohibition of the internet because there is like rampant misinformation. So he says, well, this is not helping science. So okay, so the internet should be forbidden. And then people should be separated because of contagion. So they start building these containment centers that later on start resembling concentration camps. So as a scientist, he starts doing these things with good intentions. But as the novel goes on and the government becomes even more fascist, so all of these things that ideally he thought were for the betterment of the population, they start getting worse and worse, and people start having a worse condition to live, you know? So ultimately, we could say that it works in the sense that keeps society organized, but at what price, right? And the other point is that this government does not keep climate crisis at bay. So climate crisis keeps on happening, and pandemics keep on happening too, right? So it doesn't work this way. So I think it's the question I think reaches the core of what dystopias are. So this idea that you want to build a utopia, so it is with good intentions, but then very quickly it becomes something horrible. And your second question about To Paradise is a great question because so one of the reasons why the novel is called To Paradise is that the three sections of the novel they end with these words, To Paradise. And the one that I'm discussing here is Zone 8, and it is the last one of the book, so it ends the book. So it shows the narrator talking, and she says that she's going to paradise. And like you said, there is of course, this religious connotation, but I read this ambiguously. So, of course, to go to paradise, you need to die. So it is not something that is necessarily that you're willing to do, right? So there is a finality to it. But on the other hand, you're going to, if we read this, at least in a Christian sense, you're going to a better place, right? So you're going to paradise. So you need to die, but you're going to a better place. So the end of this novel, so as I said, a kind of a spoiler, the narrator joins a kind of an insurgent movement, but the end is ambiguous. You don't know if she's going to die or not as a consequence. You don't know if she's going to be caught by the government or not. So she might die, so go to paradise, dying, but she might also become a new person that is going to fight against the system. So maybe this is going to be her paradise, right? So finding a new voice and becoming this new woman, right? So it can be a kind of a happier ending this way, right? So this, I think this to paradise, so that ends each section ends titles the novel. I think it's purposefully ambiguous.
Okay. Ambiguity is the new paradise.
Very nice.
I love it. I'm going to use it as an epigraph of my work.
So I think we have no further questions. So I'm going to do one thing here. I'm going to call it a day. But I'd love to thank Professor Mundi and Professor Anderson for being here. It was amazing. I loved your presentations. We have lots of things to think about. Okay. And as I mentioned before, this is going to be a series of webinars. So this is the first one. Next week, we are going to have day 2. And hopefully, we are going to be able to continue this web series next year, thinking about the Anthropocene and the humanities. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you, Anderson. Nice to meet you.
It was a great pleasure meeting Professor Mundi, and thank you, Tatiana, for organizing this series. It's really great.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye.
thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye-bye. See you.